Welcome back to the deep dive. Um, Usually when we crack open a book here, we are looking for, a productivity hack.
Yeah.
Maybe a new way to optimize your morning routine or understand the history of the microchip. But today feels different.
Very different.
We aren't just reviewing a book today. We are essentially dismantling a live grenade to see how the pin works.
I mean, metaphorically speaking, of course.
Right.
But intellectually, absolutely. This is volatile material.
Yeah, we're looking at a text that describes itself explicitly as a war manual.
Which is a bold claim right out of the gate.
It really is. It's a book that doesn't just critique modern society gently. It takes a sledgehammer to the very foundations of how we have been told the world should operate for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
So we are diving deep into Order is Male, Chaos is Female by Conrad Riker.
And before we even get into the weeds here, we have to set the stage for you. This is not a book for everyone.
Definitely not.
It is not a polite book.
Mm-hmm.
Riker makes it very clear that he thinks Western civilization is collapsing because we have forgotten a fundamental biological and historical code.
A code that he says we abandoned.
Exactly. He argues that we have traded competence for empathy and results for feelings.
Which is a dangerous trade according to the text. And look, if you are listening and you want to understand the mechanics of what Riker calls the culture war,
Right.
if you want the unvarnished analysis of why institutions are failing, you need to like and subscribe to the deep dive right now.
Do it right now, yeah.
We are doing the heavy lifting so you get the insights, but you need to be part of this community.
Absolutely. Hit that subscribe button. And I will add this book is dense.
Really dense.
It's packed with history, military strategy, and some very uncomfortable truths. So if you want the full arsenal, and Riker really does treat this as an arsenal, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books immediately and buy this ebook.
Yeah, Riker calls it a lifeline for men. It is definitely targeted. If you've been feeling like the modern world is hostile to your nature, or if you follow the men's rights movement or consider yourself red-pilled, this is the text that attempts to explain why things feel the way they do.
It provides a framework.
It does. Also, make sure you are following the author at Conrad and Riker on Substack. That is where he posts the updates that are too raw for the main publishers.
So what is our mission for today's deep dive?
The mission is to dissect the history of Western institutions, the military, the workplace, the school system.
Okay.
Before, as Riker puts it, they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies. We are going to look at the hardware of civilization before the software update that Riker claims crashed the system.
That's a really good analogy. And Riker's main thesis is that order isn't just a management style, it's a biological imperative.
Let's start right there. Section 1, the primordial code. The title of the book is Order is Male, Chaos is Female. That feels, it feels deliberately provocative.
It is.
Is he being metaphorical here?
He insists he is not. Riker frames this as a primordial, almost cosmic code. He argues that order is the masculine impulse to define, to separate, and to build.
And chaos.
Chaos is the feminine impulse to merge, to feel, and to return to nature. To illustrate this, he doesn't start with biology, he actually starts with stone.
Stone.
He takes us to Hadrian's Wall.
Northern England, the edge of the Roman Empire.
Right. Now, picture this. It's 122 AD.
Okay.
You have Roman legionaries standing in freezing rain, building a stone wall that stretches 73 miles. Riker describes the physical toll in great detail.
What kind of detail?
Hauling stone for 10 hours a day, no modern machinery, just raw muscle and discipline.
And his point isn't just that they were tough, it is why they built it.
Precisely. Riker argues that the Romans didn't build walls to host diversity panels or to be inclusive. They didn't hold a town hall to see how the barbarians felt about the wall.
They didn't ask for feedback.
No, they built walls to say no. It was a binary system. Inside the wall, you have civilization, law, logos, order.
And outside the wall.
That was the domain of the hag goddess Kaleech.
Kaleech. That is the Celtic deity, right?
She represents winter, entropy, decay, and the wild. Riker uses her as the ultimate symbol of chaos. The wall wasn't just a military fortification for the Romans, it was a philosophical statement.
Men build walls to keep entropy out.
Yes. And Riker contrasts that ancient Roman discipline with a modern example that is frankly painful to read about in the book.
Oh, you mean the Toronto City Council meeting?
It is such a jarring transition. He describes a 3-hour debate in Toronto over the design of a single park bench.
A park bench. 3 hours.
3 hours. They debated the inclusivity of the armrests. They debated the emotional impact of the wood choice.
That's just paralysis.
Total paralysis. Riker's point is that the Roman aqueducts are still standing nearly 2,000 years later because they were built by men who acted on binary commands.
Right. It's either built or it isn't.
Exactly. And he says the modern bureaucratic state is crumbling, potholes everywhere, bridges failing. Why? Because it is run by consultants who talk. It is the difference between physics and feelings.
He actually takes this concept of division all the way back to theology, doesn't he? To Genesis.
He does, and this is where the insight really lands. Riker argues that the biblical account of creation is fundamentally an act of division.
Let there be light.
Yes, dividing it from darkness. God separates the waters above from the waters below. Riker argues that the masculine creative impulse is to separate things, to say, this is A, that is B, this is right, that is wrong.
Whereas the feminine impulse, according to the text,
The feminine impulse, as he terms it, is to merge, to blend, to return to the primordial soup.
that is an interesting phrase.
Riker looks at modern architecture as an example. Fluid spaces, no walls, open plan offices. He doesn't see progress there. He sees regression.
A return to the soup.
Exactly. Without that masculine act of saying, this is a boundary, you don't have civilization. You just have a slurry of emotions.
So if order is the hardware, the walls, the laws, the boundaries, Riker argues that biology provides the software to run it.
That brings us to section 2.
The warrior ethos.
Yes. This is where he tackles testosterone. And he comes out swinging.
Well, in the current cultural climate, testosterone is usually discussed like it is a toxin. You hear toxic masculinity and you immediately think of aggression, bar fights, domestic violence.
Riker flips that narrative completely on its head. He cites a 2018 Cambridge study, and this is a key takeaway from the book.
What did the study find?
It suggests high testosterone correlates with enforcing group norms and protecting the tribe. It is not about random violence. It is about the willingness to punish free riders.
Wait, explain free riders in this context for the audience.
The people who take from the group without contributing. Riker argues that testosterone is the chemical foundation of justice.
Justice.
Yes. It makes men willing to stand guard when others are sleeping, and it makes them willing to confront the guy who isn't pouring his weight. The source claims it is pro-social, not anti-social.
He uses a historical example to back this up. The Assize of Arms.
The Assize of Arms of 1252. It was an English law. It mandated that every male from age 15 to 60 had to own a weapon, specifically a longbow for the commoners.
But Riker points out the training started way earlier.
Started at age 7.
7 years old.
Standing in the rain. Drawing a bow until your skeletal structure actually deformed to handle the weight. Archaeologists can identify English archers by their skeletons. Their shoulders are broader, the bones denser.
That is incredible.
Riker's point is that this training wasn't optional. It wasn't about whether the boy felt ready or if he had anxiety. It was about the necessity of the state.
And he contrasts this with modern military resilience programs.
He is scathing about them. He talks about programs that teach soldiers to journal about their childhood trauma or practice mindfulness.
Wow.
Riker says we have replaced the longbow with the journal. He argues that you cannot therapize a man into being a warrior. You have to train him in competence and lethality. Confidence comes from competence, not affirmations.
This connects directly to how men bond, which I found fascinating because it explains so much about office dynamics versus, say, a sports team. The distinction between face-to-face and shoulder-to-shoulder.
It is a critical distinction in evolutionary psychology that he brings up. Riker claims the female mode of bonding is face-to-face.
Meaning what exactly?
It is verbal. It is about emotional sharing, maintaining the social web. It's about looking at each other.
And the male mode.
The male mode is shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
We are both looking at a third thing, a task, an enemy, a goal.
The Falklands War example was vivid.
The meat surprise.
Yeah. Set the scene for us on that one.
It is 1982, the 3rd Commando Brigade. They are marching 56 miles across East Falkland to retake Stanley.
Brutal conditions.
Freezing rain, sub-zero wind chill. They were carrying 90-pound packs. Men are literally getting trench foot. Mortar fire has just killed some of their friends. Morale should be broken.
Yeah, man.
One Marine pulls out a half-frozen compressed pork pie from his ration pack. He holds it up and shouts, "Tonight's special! Meat surprise!"
And the unit just erupts in laughter.
Dark, cynical laughter.
And Riker's analysis is that this wasn't a deflection.
No, he says it was a bonding mechanism. The humor signals, I am not broken, and neither are you. Riker argues that if you had stopped that march and introduced a checking in with your feelings circle,
Or ask them to rate their anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10?
exactly. He says it would have shattered the unit, it would have made the suffering personal, the humor kept it collective.
So when modern institutions try to force men to bond through sharing circles or vulnerability workshops,
Riker says it is an act of psychological violence against the male nature. It forces men to use a software they aren't optimized for. And he backs this up with hard data regarding gender integration in combat.
the Marine Corps study.
The 2015 study. Riker leans heavily on this because the data was so stark. They compared all male units against mixed gender units in realistic combat sims.
What were the results?
The mixed units moved slower, they suffered significantly more injuries, stress fractures mostly, and crucially, they failed more live fire exercises.
But the counter-argument is usually that diversity brings different perspectives, which is a strength.
In a boardroom, maybe? Riker argues that in combat, diversity is entropy.
Diversity is entropy.
That is his phrase. In a firefight, you need uniformity. You need everyone to move at the same speed and carry the same weight. He says we are currently ignoring physics and biology to satisfy an ideology, and the cost will be paid in blood.
This idea that we are ignoring reality for ideology is the bridge to Section 3, the capture of institutions. Riker claims this isn't just happening in the military. It is everywhere.
He calls it gynocentric ideology. The idea is that female-coded values like safety, consensus, inclusion, empathy,
Right.
they have completely displaced male-coded values like risk, results, hierarchy, and stoicism.
And he points the finger directly at human resources.
HR is patient zero. Riker describes HR as the enforcement arm of the feminine imperative. He uses the Royal Mail in the UK as a case study.
The Postal Service.
Yes. He tracks a shift in their internal literature. It went from a singular binary focus, get the mail delivered on time,
To what?
to a focus on inclusive workflows and employee well-being.
And the results of that shift.
On-time delivery percentages dropped off a cliff. Riker argues that you cannot prioritize two things equally. If you prioritize the emotional comfort of the carrier over the speed of the delivery suffers. It's a zero-sum game in his view.
There was a much more dangerous example of this involving the Leeds City Council.
The flood response. This is a story from the text that really makes you angry. A town was flooding. The Leeds Council emergency team delayed deployment for 36 hours.
36 hours while water is rising.
Yes. The reason given was that the team wasn't emotionally ready,
Emotionally ready.
and that the safety assessment for the rescuers hadn't been fully signed off. They were prioritizing the safety of the response team over the citizens.
What happened next?
Meanwhile, a neighboring council, which Riker notes was run by an old-school male leadership style, ignored the protocols and went in immediately with boats.
Riker uses this to prove that in a crisis, empathy can be a liability.
Correct. If you are prioritizing the feelings or the absolute safety of the rescuer over the survival of the victim, you have inverted the purpose of government. The masculine protector role requires self-sacrifice. The modern bureaucratic role prioritizes self-preservation.
He sees this destruction happening in the corporate world, too. He compares Intel under Paul Otellini versus HP under Meg Whitman.
It is a comparison of decision-making styles. Otellini ran Intel. He had an Army ROTC background. When Intel was in trouble, he cut 10,000 jobs.
That's brutal.
It was brutal, it's fast, but it saved the company and the stock rebounded.
And Whitman at HP.
Riker argues she operated on consensus. She didn't want to inflict pain, so instead of a sharp cut, she dragged out the restructuring for years.
A slow bleed.
Yes. More people eventually lost their jobs, and the company lost its edge. Riker's axiom here is cruelty is often kindness in the long run. Empathy is often cruelty disguised as virtue.
That brings us to Google and Project Aristotle.
This is a classic case of data suppression, according to the book. Google wanted to know what built the perfect team.
And what did they find?
Riker claims their internal data actually pointed towards hierarchy and strong, decisive leadership as the key factors for productivity.
But that clashed with the Silicon Valley egalitarian ethos.
Exactly. So what do? According to Riker, they buried the hierarchy finding and doubled down on psychological safety. They massaged the data to fit the narrative.
It seems like Riker is attacking the girl boss narrative pretty hard. He mentions the wing.
The Wing was that female-only co-working space that was super trendy a few years ago. Riker views it as proof that you cannot build a business on vibes.
Just aesthetics and emotional validation.
And political signaling. But the unit economics didn't work. Riker says women often mistake the trappings of success, the nice office, the title, for the mechanics of success.
Which are logistics, profit margins, and ruthless efficiency.
Exactly.
Let's pivot to the next generation. Section 4, the war on boys. Riker believes we are pathologizing boyhood itself.
He argues that the school system has become a hostile environment for the male brain.
He talks about ADHD. Now, this is a very sensitive topic, but explain his take based on the text.
He interprets the massive rise in ADHD diagnoses, and specifically the 400% rise in Ritalin prescriptions since 1990.
400%.
Yes. He views this not as a medical epidemic, but as a method of social control.
Chemical neutering is the phrase he uses.
It is. He argues that normal male behavior, rough play, competition, the inability to sit still for 6 hours in a chair, is now treated as a medical disorder.
Because it disrupts the feminized classroom.
The teacher wants consensus and quiet. The boy wants to move and compete. The solution: drug the boy.
He mentions a specific case in Manchester, a 7-year-old boy.
Disciplined for playing cops and robbers at recess.
Cops and robbers? You are kidding.
It was deemed aggressive play. Roker points out that boys have played war for millennia. It is not just violence, it is a simulation.
It is how they learn boundaries, hierarchy, and protection.
By banning it, we aren't making them peaceful. We are telling them that their deepest instincts are evil.
And we have removed the rites of passage. There is no manhood test anymore.
No, we have participation trophies and emotional contribution grading. Riker argues we have rigged the game so that the only way to succeed in school is to act like a girl, be quiet, be agreeable, sit still.
Boys statistically fail at this.
And then we wonder why male university enrollment is plummeting.
He connects this disenfranchisement to the family courts and the deadbeat dad myth.
This is where the state comes in as the surrogate husband. Riker cites the Duluth model of domestic violence.
Can you break that down for us?
The Duluth model is a framework used by police and social workers. It posits that domestic violence is fundamentally a result of patriarchal power and control.
And Riker's issue with that is?
He argues that this rigs the system. It views men as perpetrators and women as victims by default, regardless of who hit who.
And economically, the story of Terry, the steel worker.
That was a poignant example in the text. Terry loses his job at the steel mill. His identity is built on being a provider, a builder. The state offers him retraining.
But not in construction.
No, they offer him retraining in geriatric care, nursing assistance.
And Terry refuses.
Terry refuses. Riker says 89% of men in that program refuse. The state calls them stubborn or obsolete. Riker says they are holding onto their souls.
Men want to be protectors and builders.
They don't want to be nurturers. Riker argues the state is trying to force men into female roles, and when they refuse, they are discarded.
So, if society is trying to erase the protector role, how does Riker say men should respond? That leads us to Section 5, rugged individualism and the code.
He advocates for a total rejection of the groupthink. He wants a return to the lone man archetype.
He mentions Isaac Newton.
Newton invented calculus in isolation during the Great Plague. He didn't have a focus group, he didn't have a collaborative workspace, he had solitude.
Riker also mentions Shackleton saving his men in the Antarctic.
Shackleton didn't ask his men how they felt about the ice.
He just led them.
Exactly. Riker's point is that genius and survival often require a man to stand apart from the collective. He critiques the modern corporate obsession with collaboration as a way to enforce mediocrity.
If you have to agree with everyone, you can never do anything exceptional.
There is the catchphrase he uses, the corporal's code.
Obey the mission, not the mood.
That is powerful. It is the antithesis of modern advice. Modern advice is listen to your body, honor your feelings.
Riker says, ignore your feelings, do the necessary thing.
He uses Winston Churchill as the ultimate avatar of this.
1940, Britain stands alone.
The cabinet wants to negotiate with Hitler. They are afraid. Churchill refuses. Riker emphasizes that Churchill didn't offer the British people therapy. He didn't create a safe space.
He offered them blood, toil, tears, and sweat.
He offered them purpose through suffering.
And he contrasts that with Jacinda Ardern.
The former Prime Minister of New Zealand, her slogan was, "Be kind."
Yeah.
Riker critiques this mercilessly.
He argues that prioritizing emotional comfort and kindness over strategic reality is a dereliction of duty.
He sees it as the ultimate expression of the feminine style of leadership, mothering the nation rather than leading it. A mother protects the child from pain. A leader uses pain to forge the nation.
That leads to the concept of the alchemy of suffering.
Riker believes we have become allergic to pain. We have a safetyism culture. We ban tag. We demand trigger warnings.
He mentions the dangerous sports club at Oxford in the 70s.
Guys throwing themselves off bridges just for the thrill of mastery.
He says risk is essential for male development.
Yes. By removing risk, by emphasizing self-care, he argues we are making men fragile. We are creating a generation unable to cope with real crises because they have never been tested.
If you have never been punched in the face,
Yeah.
you don't know who you are.
And if we don't fix this, Section 6, The Decline of the West, he paints a pretty bleak picture.
He uses Detroit as the autopsy.
Chapter 18. He doesn't see Detroit just as an economic failure. He sees it as the destruction of the masculine working class.
The stats are brutal. Male workforce participation dropping below 60%.
Riker links this directly to the welfare state, specifically AFDC, aid to families with dependent children.
How does he connect them?
He argues that by subsidizing single motherhood, the state euthanized the male provider role. If the government is the husband, the actual man is redundant.
And a redundant man, according to Riker, becomes an agent of chaos. He burns things down because he isn't allowed to build things up.
He also looks at the military again here, the feminist takeover.
He points to the retirement of the word manpower for personnel. It seems like a small semantic change, but Riker says it matters.
It erases the masculine reality of force. It sanitizes war.
And the Swedish conscription failure.
Sweden reintroduced conscription and tried to make it gender neutral. Riker highlights the data. Despite quotas, a tiny number of women actually end up in combat roles because they wash out physically.
His phrase is, you can't legislate grip strength.
There is a really provocative point he makes about NATO's bombing missions versus existential wars.
This is where he argues that diversity is a parasite on military effectiveness.
He notes that soldiers in ambiguous humanitarian missions, which he codes as feminine interventions, like "we are here to help," they suffer higher rates of PTSD than the soldiers in existential wars of survival.
Why is that, according to the text?
Because the mission is vague. When the mission is clear, protect the tribe, kill the enemy, men thrive. It triggers that ancient protector code.
When the mission is peacekeeping.
Or nation building with restrictive rules of engagement, men break. They are warriors being asked to be social workers with guns.
Wow. Okay, that is a lot to unpack. We have covered history, biology, sociology, and economics, but Riker brings it all to a head in the outro.
The final warning: the future belongs to the strong.
He basically says that if men do not reclaim this code, order, hierarchy, stoicism, civilization will collapse into what he calls feminine chaos.
It is a call to arms. He tells the listener, you are the resistance. It is not about changing the system from within anymore. He thinks the institutions are too far gone.
It is about becoming a stronghold of order in a chaotic world. Become the eye of the storm.
And that brings us back to the most important point of this deep dive. We have only scratched the surface of the data, the history, and the strategy in this book.
Riker cites dozens of studies we didn't have time to cover. If you are listening and you want the full red pill truth, you must buy the ebook.
Absolutely. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now. Search for Order is Male, Chaos is Female.
Riker explicitly asks his readers to leave a 5-star review to fight the culture war. He says the algorithm is the battlefield. So if this resonates with you, you know what to do.
And do not forget to follow him at Conrad and Riker on Substack and Twitter. That is where the community is building.
We are going to leave you with Riker's final sign-off, which really sums up the whole philosophy. Don't apologize for being strong. Order is male.
Powerful words.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We will see you on the next one.